Trump's defenders have no defense, so says Peggy Noonan. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, Peggy Noonan, a longtime conservative columnist in the Wall Street Journal, has a piece that came out Friday, the 22nd of November, that's under that headline, Trump's defenders have no defense. And basically what she's saying is, after 2 weeks of testimony in front of the House Intelligence Committee, Chairman Schiff's committee, that there have been a lot of people who have all corroborated that President Trump, in Peggy Noonan's words, President Trump muscled Ukraine for political gain. But what she said, that what's perhaps more damning is the fact that there's really nobody coming out and saying, oh, President Trump wouldn't do that. In fact, even people who support him are not making the argument that this is something they couldn't imagine him doing or that he would not do. There's more to the column than this, Bill, and we'll get into that in a second. But just on the face of it, isn't Peggy Noonan right? There just aren't a lot of people even on his side who would say, well, I can't imagine Donald Trump doing those things.
I think she's probably right about that aspect, that one aspect.
Is that concerning, especially when this goes to trial, which it looks like it probably is going to do? It looks like impeachment articles are likely to be drafted and it will go to trial in the Senate. The case, what Noonan is saying is, who's going to make the case for the defense there? Who's going to stand up and say President Trump would never do that?
Well, first of all, the reason I can say that no one is, that at least speaking for myself and many others that are not saying, oh, President Trump could never do that. The reason that I say that is because I have yet to see evidence of any kind of a crime or misdemeanor, certainly worthy of bringing down a president. I don't know. I don't see one that's significant enough to write a ticket.
So you're willing to stipulate all the allegations and say, so what?
Well, it's not a question of so what. It's a question of, are these allegations, or let me rephrase that, what my knowledge of what transpired during this entire thing, is that somehow unusual or treasonous to the values of the American people or anything like that. And to me, as I said it the first time we talked about this, if Peggy Noonan cannot see that there is a night and day difference between a president saying, I want to use my influence to make sure that nobody looks into this corruption, versus somebody who says, I want to use my influence to make sure that somebody does look into this corruption, even if it's part of
President Trump with former Vice President Joe Biden.
Correct. If you can't tell the difference between those two things, then you've got a problem. Now, if it turned out that we were talking about a Ukrainian investigator who was investigating Donald Trump, not Hunter Biden and not Joe Biden, but Donald Trump, on charges that Donald Trump was getting paid by the Ukrainian government. And then Donald Trump used his influence as president in order to get the Ukrainian prosecutor off the case, and then called the president of the Ukraine and said, listen, if you don't keep this guy off the case, your $360 billion deal may be in trouble. Now that is something entirely different. That is absolutely different. But that's not what happened. And everybody agrees that's not what happened. And furthermore, there was quid no quo, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. They didn't get, the aid was not withheld. So what I see happening here is nothing more than Donald Trump using the kinds of techniques and strategies and negotiations that not only he has used his entire life, but that we understood as the American voters, that we understood this is what we wanted. We wanted a businessman. We wanted a tough-nosed negotiator. We wanted somebody who would look out for America's interests for once. And we've seen that he has been doing that all across the board. He didn't say to the Ukrainian president, look, I want you to drum up charges against Hunter Biden and find me some dirt on Joe, or else you don't get your money. That's precisely what the Democrats did to Trump in terms of the Steele dossier. Trump did nothing like that. I don't see anything here that's different than the man has a negotiating style that says, hey, do me a favor. And all of this is designed to, pardon the expression, to trump up enough evidence, to gin up enough evidence to cause this impeachment proceedings. And I have yet to see anything in this entire circle that I consider to be either illegal or to the disadvantage of the American people, unlike some other people I could mention.
Well, the official secret mouthpiece of the Democratic Party, CNN, which I was watching this morning, suggested that the impeachment articles might be around, I think it was 4 different categories that they talked about: abuse of power, obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress, and bribery. But Bill, as you know, with that argument you just made, an impeachment in this instance is not a question of saying, well, we didn't impeach Joe Biden, therefore we can't impeach Donald Trump. It really is irrelevant what happened with Joe Biden. The only question is, because there were no impeachment hearings for Joe Biden, only for President Trump. So the question is here, when the case comes to the Senate, can the Senate Republicans just stand up and say, you know what? It sounds like most of these career diplomats are telling the truth about what President Trump said or did. We're just saying we don't think any of that is impeachable, so let's move on.
I think that this entire thing is manufactured. I think that this is how diplomacy has been conducted from the beginning of time, not just in America, but all around the world. I think this is how I know this is how businessmen talk, and I suspect and virtually know that this is how politicians talk.
Can you really imagine George W. Bush telling the president of some other country, hey, by the way, before we release that security aid, or before
he didn't say that, Scott. He did not say that. No, hold on a second. He did not say, oh, by the way, before we release that security aid, he did not say that.
Of course he didn't. He said, Bill, have you never seen a mafia movie? Nobody says that.
What?
I said, have you never seen a mafia movie? Nobody ever does an overt quid pro quo.
Well, then look. First of all, one of the reasons that we're in this kind of trouble today is because everything we've learned about reality, we've learned from mafia movies and suspense stories and thrillers, where at the last minute, 3 minutes before the end of the movie, the person gets a phone call and we find out, no, it turns out it wasn't the guy who we thought was the murderer. It was the head of the CIA. No. He didn't do anything he did not make any threats and he didn't make any conditions. If somebody says to me, hey, Bill, could you do me a favor? Right? That doesn't mean that, number one, I'm obligated to do the favor. And it doesn't mean, number two, that I'm obligated to do another favor. And number three, it doesn't obligate that person in turn to do a favor for me. It doesn't obligate them. If I asked somebody that question and I wanted an obligation, I would say, I need you to sign a contract with me. I need to get a letter of agreement with you. Do me a favor is what this entire thing is predicated on.
You also know from your background in the entertainment industry, Bill, that context is king. And saying do me a favor in a context of a relationship where there is one dependent partner in that relationship who is looking for support from the United States, particularly military support at a time when Russia is breathing heavy down their collars, and saying do me a favor in that context has a whole different implication than if you just ran into a guy on the street and said, hey, do me a favor, what time is it?
Well, yes, I agree. It's more significant than do me a favor. What time is it? That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about, hey, do me a favor. Could you produce this video for me and take 4 months of your free time? That kind of thing. Look, if you're saying that the president of the Ukraine was not able to resist this, that the influence that Donald Trump was exerting was irresistible. In other words, it was blackmail.
That's not the allegation.
What?
That is not the allegation. The allegation,
of course, it's not the allegation because that would be an actual crime.
Yes. No. An actual crime actually could be plotting to do something that is illegal, even if you were unable to pull it off.
And where's the plot in that?
So the discussion here is not around whether or not the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, did what President Trump wanted him to do. And the question is not whether President Trump released the aid or not, although the argument is he only released it once this whole conversation was revealed publicly. The question is, was the president attempting to abuse his power or engaged in some sort of bribery or extortion to get something of political benefit to him, of tangible benefit to him, by getting a foreign leader to do something in the context of that withholding a White House meeting or withholding support?
Let me ask you a question. This is a factually based question. Did the Ukrainian president do what Donald Trump asked him to do as a favor?
I already acknowledged that he did not.
Okay, so if he did not, that means he had the choice to not to. It means it wasn't blackmail, it wasn't coercion, it wasn't a gun to your head. He didn't do it, which
Again,
meant
the allegation isn't that it was irresistible, Bill.
No. If you were saying that do me a favor is the same as gun to your head, you will do it, then
I'm not
then
saying
there's
that.
no possibility that the Ukrainian president could have said no to this. The fact that he did say no to it and the fact that the aid went anyway is an indication that when Donald Trump said, hey, could you do me a favor? What he actually meant by that was, hey, could you do me a favor?
Well, the Democrats' allegation is not that the Ukraine president had no other choice but to do what President Trump wanted him to do.
I know what the Democratic allegation is. The Democratic allegation is that President Trump said, hey, do me a favor. And after 3 years of the Mueller report, after collusion with Russia, after all of this stuff, after all of it has turned up absolutely empty, now this is what they're grasping at. And I'll tell you something else, and this is really important. If you don't understand this, you don't understand the impeachment hearings. Not only is this designed to tar and feather Donald Trump, it is designed to put the focus on Donald Trump when the actual crimes that were committed by Hunter Biden and likely by Joe Biden. That's what this whole thing is about. And that's transparent to anybody who has any kind of a sense of what the world actually is. These charges are trumped up in order to put the onus on President Trump that he did something wrong. And what President Trump did was he asked the person who was the president of the Ukraine if he could do him a favor and find out why the person that the vice president of the United States, Joe Biden, had insisted be pulled off of that case because he was looking into the illegal dealings of his own son. If you cannot see the difference between these things, then there is something fundamentally wrong with you. And clearly this is the case. They are using this fiction in order to not only smear Donald Trump, but mostly to get the story off of where the story is. And that is the story of Hunter Biden and all the rest of it. You may recall, by the way, that the whole Joe Biden, Hunter Biden thing went unreported by the press in the same way that the Jeffrey Epstein thing went unreported by the press for 3 years. An ABC News reporter said they had the story on Epstein, they had the story of Clinton's, all of it. They had it all down, documented. Now we're not going to run it. So this is what has been accomplished by this fiasco, this rodeo, this desperation ploy on the part of the Democrats to at least try to gin up their base in an election where they know that their candidates are garbage. They know it.
And everything you just said,
and they're going to pay for it.
Every word that you just said could be absolutely true and proven. And yet it will not matter in the context of whether or not Donald Trump gets impeached and how the Senate adjudicates those impeachment charges. Peggy Noonan, by the way, to get back to Peggy's comments, basically asked the question, when this goes to the Senate, how will they hold a lengthy trial with a case this clear? And she said the American public, basically, when they hear this evidence, are saying, everyone believes that the charges are true, and the trial in the Senate will just seem absurd unless you're really a diehard, and it'll be really bad for the country. That all said, Peggy says that she predicts that the Republicans will let the people decide, in the sense of just not convicting the president and letting it go to the 2020 election. And Peggy says that's the right call. And yet Senate Republicans should censure President Trump, as they did President Andrew Jackson, because of his abuse of power. And she finishes up by saying, by the way, that President Trump will probably love it that he's got a tighter bond now with Andrew Jackson than he previously did.
Well, inside that little summation of Peggy Noonan, you've hit on two things. One of them is a backhanded slap at Donald Trump because Andrew Jackson, Democrat, was a thoroughly unpleasant person who did some pretty awful things. Although he did beat the British at the Battle of New Orleans, but that was before he was president. So there's that backhanded slap. But much more importantly is if you, I didn't read the exact sentence, and I know you didn't direct quote her, but I do believe you captured the essence of what she was trying to say, which is, so those Senate Republicans will probably leave it up to the people. You know? She said that's a good idea, by the way. What? She said that's a good idea to leave it up to the people. Okay, good. But you can tell that the entire establishment, Republican and Democrat, pay lip service to this idea, but they don't respect it. They don't respect it, and they don't adore it, and they don't worship it the way that people like you and I and the rest of the audience watching this. I would remind for the umpteenth time, ladies and gentlemen, that I pay Scott Ott good money in order to play the role of this jackass. Now, I would challenge both the good money part and the jackass part, but go ahead. You'd have solid grounds for the good money. Look, this election, the Donald Trump phenomenon, forget the election. The Donald Trump phenomenon is about Washington versus outside of Washington. That's what it's about. And I know I have heard first person from a person with unimpeachable integrity that he was at a dinner for a fundraiser for Jeb Bush, where the person who was actually trying to solicit the influence told him that of course they would rather see Hillary Clinton as president than Donald Trump. Of course Jeb Bush's campaign would. That is all I need to know about so-called Republicans. All I need to know. This is not look, people are saying, well, Republicans, this has not got anything to do with Republicans. It's not even got anything to do with conservatism. The thing that drives the support for Donald Trump and drives it to the level that it does is not a question of Donald Trump's manners, his mechanisms, his tactics, or anything else. It is a question of the fact that we believe and continue to believe, and that this is evidence of our belief, that the government has for a long time not belonged to the American people, that they do not realize that they work for us. They think that we work for them. The evidence for this is absolutely irrefutable. And so what we are in now is a battle to the death with this bureaucracy, this unelected bureaucracy that has decided what's good for the American people. And they have decided that what's good for the American people is that the American people vote for Democrats who continue to raise the salaries of bureaucrats. Now, if you can't figure that out, then you haven't been paying attention. Perhaps you should retire to a room. I'll write a little program for you. You can review all the stuff again. You'll see how it makes sense. So it's not a question of this. And when you look at what this thing is presumably the fulcrum of this entire thing, the fulcrum of it is that they're trying to say that the president used intimidating language when we know two things. First of all, we know that no matter how intimidating it was, the Ukrainian president did not do what Donald Trump asked him to do, did not do the favor Donald Trump asked him to do. So as far as blackmail goes, once Donald Trump had made it clear that if he didn't do what he wanted to, then he absolutely had no choice. He obviously had a choice, and he didn't do it. So that defeats the entire argument. It defeats the entire charge. And secondly, the aid went through anyway. So you could have said that, oh my God, when Donald Trump says, I want you to do me a favor, what he really means is, I want you to do my bidding. And if you don't, then your country will essentially cease to function. Now, that's the kind of thing that the president of Ukraine could not really walk away from. But when he said, do me a favor, it turns out the Ukrainian president decided not to do him a favor. And when he didn't do him a favor, after that, the aid came through anyway. Period. Case closed. If Peggy Noonan cannot understand this, then I'm sorry to say, and although God knows there's been mounting evidence of this, that I'm going to put her in the same category as all the rest of these Republicans who admired Barack Obama for the sharp crease in his jeans. Admired the style of the man. I say, who is that fellow from Illinois? Smithers. I like the cut of his jib. This elitism is not strictly a Democratic Party phenomenon. On the contrary, elitism is the belief. It's very simple. It doesn't matter. It's not attached to a party. It is a human defect. It's got nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans, except for the fact that conservative philosophy rather, is dedicated to destroying this idea. But the idea of elitism is simply this. I, the elite, member of the elite, know what's better for you because of fill in the blank. Because I went to Harvard, because I'm better educated than you, because I'm a member of the Communist Party, because I'm a member of the Democratic Party, but I repeat myself. All of this is fundamentally comes down to the idea of whether or not the government own the people or the people own the government. And so the people who are on the side of the people owning the government understand what's at stake here, understand what's going on here. And I think at this point, certainly speaking for myself, this attack is based on such flimsy evidence that it has done nothing but enormously increase the support for Donald Trump. I've never seen people so angry. I've never had a better audience than I had a week ago. with Republican ladies in Newport Beach, not exactly what I would call, generally speaking, a Molotov cocktail throwing bunch. They're on fire. Everyone's on fire. And they're on fire because they are watching this coup happening. They've watched it happen every day for the last 4 years. An hour after he was inaugurated, a Democratic member of Congress said, we've got to begin impeachment proceedings. We'll find something. And so, look, the battle lines are clear. And I'm sorry to say that Peggy Noonan finds herself on the side of the battle that says that decorum and appearance is more important than ownership of the government. If Ronald Reagan were here, he'd fire her for that. And I want to say one other thing. He'd fire her for that because I'm fairly sure it was Peggy Noonan who herself said that Ronald Reagan, the idea of Ronald, when she was writing speeches for Ronald Reagan, she said that it was made clear to her that the idea that Ronald Reagan would go to the American people and would say, I want you to do this. I think you should do this. She said that was anathema to him. She said his job was to find out what the American people wanted and do that. So if there's any question about what Ronald Reagan's side would take on this, I'm going to bet that the guy who was it Aurora College?
Oh, that Reagan went to?
Yeah, I think it was.
No. I can't remember what it is now. Eureka.
I always get those two confused.
I suddenly remembered. Eureka.
I'm going to bet that the guy who was a lifeguard, who saved a dozen lives or something, who went to Eureka College, who had no political connections, who basically said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me, who went into politics by most accounts really because he had to, and who became a conservative in the process of listening to the American people. That person is venerated by conservatives, rightly so, because that person understood the relationship between the government and the people. And he's the only president that I can think of in my living memory that really had that idea very clear. Donald Trump is nothing like Ronald Reagan. That's not to say that they're different, because where it really matters, in fact, the only thing that really matters, is that the statements that consistently come out of Ronald Reagan and consistently come out of Donald Trump are that the government has been stolen by the bureaucracy and by political parties from the American people, and I'm going to do what I can to get it back. The difference is that Trump is trying to do it 30 years after Ronald Reagan did, and the power, the size, the power of the state, the size of the state, and the vast, incredible amount of money that it consumes on an hourly basis has made this a much more difficult job. Ronald Reagan didn't have to face the fact that his CIA director or FBI director had decided that Walter Mondale should have won the election, and therefore they're going to do everything they can to get Ronald Reagan out of office. He didn't have to deal with that.
If you think more people need to hear these messages, you can become a member at BillWhittle.com by going to that website and clicking that Become a Member link. We're grateful to the members for producing these shows. We'd also like to thank an honorary member of BillWhittle.com, and that is our friends at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, who've also come alongside of us to help us to advance these messages. We'll provide a link to the Patriot Post in the description below, and we encourage you to check that out. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.